We have our second keynote speaker, Professor Jason Arday. So Jason is the 2002 professorial chair in the Sociology of Education at the University of Cambridge, the youngest professor at the moment. Previously, Jason was professor of sociology in the School of Education at the College of Social Sciences. He's also held the position of associate professor in sociology at Durham University and deputy executive dean for people and culture in the Faculty of Social Science and Health. Jason is a visiting professor at the Ohio State University in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and an honorary professor at the Universities of Durham and Glasgow. Jason holds other visiting professorships at Coventry University, University of Northampton, and Nelson Mandela University. He is a trustee of the Runnymede Trust, the UK's leading race equality think tank, and the British Sociological Association. So Jason sits on the Centre for Labour and Social Studies, the National Advisory Panel, and the NHS Race and Health Observatory Academic Reference Group. And he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So shall we welcome Professor Jason? Over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you again as well. How is life treating everyone? I can't see anybody, so I don't, sorry that you have to see my silly face from the screen, but how are you all keeping? Is everyone well? I can't tell, so I'm hoping everyone is well. This is good, thank you, Kate, and thanks everyone else. Brilliant. Yeah, oh, it's brilliant, doing great. This is really good. I just wanted to say, like, it's such an honor to be here with all of you. It's honestly, it's such a big privilege. It really means a hell of a lot. And I mean, before I say anything, that's of any note, I'm more motivated to learn from all of you. So I won't be speaking for too long. I also know that we're slightly behind schedule as well. So I kind of really want to engage with all of you. And I just want to say, you know, I was very fortunate about, how many years, might be 6 or 7 years ago now. I feel like it's 7 years ago. So I went to the first one of these, and I was fortunate enough that a wonderful, exceptional human being who happens to be one of the best academics on the planet, Dr. Bernardine, took a chance on me and put me on the stage with, at the time, Professor Palmer and Professor Shaliam, and Professor Donald Palmer even, and Professor Robbie Shaliam, and gave me an opportunity at King's College back then. And that moment ended up proving to be one of the most seminal moments of my life. So it's so crazy to see this thing kind of come full circle in terms of, you know, how Bernardine has built this community and how it's gone on to thrive and go to where it's gone to now. And never did I think in a million years that I would ever be headlining any kind of bill, because I was just so grateful that Bernardine saw something in me and had me involved in the first place. So I just really want to pay tribute to Bernardine and just say, you know, what you've done over the last 6-7 years is quite remarkable. And by my humble estimation, I think you're one of the best people in this sector. And I can't tell you how much I love you, follow your lead, and just look up to you so much. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, because it's just creating a space for all of us. And it means a hell of a lot to a lot of people. So it really does. And I don't say this slightly, but you're the best. You really are. And I mean, obviously the conference theme is really about how we build this sense of community and how we kind of sustain community. And it's quite an important thing, because you know, how one creates their communities and their, as people, you know, this turn of phrase is often used, like, you know, it's important to find your people, but increasingly that becomes difficult. And I think it becomes difficult because there are a couple of things that we really orientate from in higher education and the academy, but society more broadly. And I think selfishness is one of them. I think individualism is one of them. And I think that there's a huge rejection of collectivism. And what's so beautiful about everyone being here today in the way that they are, and there's people in the crowd, there's 136 people online, is this sense of community, is this sense of collectivism. And, I always think of this idea kind of twitching fingers versus penetrative fist. And I think what community embodies when we do it properly is this idea of a penetrative fist. And metaphorically, penetrative fist can punch through anything. Twitching fingers, you're going to snap fingers off if you try and punch through a brick wall of inequality. But if you have this kind of clenched fist of collectivism, anything is penetrable. And in terms of how we build communities, I guess what I want us to kind of really think about is we're making this cake. We're making this cake, and I don't proclaim to be the best cake maker in the world, but we're making this cake. And what we need to think about between the lot of us is what ingredients do we want in this cake? Now, we can have anything at the moment. And to stick on the cake metaphor, the cake we're digesting at the moment is kind of leaving us all a little bit constipated. It's not particularly nice. It leaves a horrible aftertaste. And it orientates back to this same thing. The ingredients that make up that cake are really situated around kind of selfishness, individualism, an absence of love in spaces where love is needed. Now, if we draw on kind of Bell Hooks's mantra, who is kind of my academic heroine, love is a great axis for us to spin off. And to quote the great Jimi Hendrix, what we do want is an axis bold as love. So we've got our axis to spin off. We want it to be as bold as we want it to be. So in coming back to this cake, what ingredients do we want our cake in terms of our communal cake? What do we want in there? I would humbly suggest, or modestly suggest, we need love as an important part of that. We need this idea of building, one, a sense of self, but two, building a sense of others. And what makes Bernardine so remarkably unique, along with people like Professor Palmer and others, is that they spend a lot of their time thinking about how they can build communities, build individuals. And that becomes hugely important, because actually tiny drops make a mighty ocean. And, the things that you learn in those kind of little tiny spates, they do end up making this huge big ocean one day that people can kind of take from. So we've got love as part of this cake. We've got kind of this idea of community as part of this cake. We've got this idea of pulling the ladder down. So very often, I think in this sense of individualism, we pull the ladder up. Not us particularly, but people can do that. So I think it's about how we pull the ladder down, and I think that becomes hugely important. So in our cake, we've got love, we've got community, we've got a ladder. What else do we need to have in there? I think compassion is hugely important in terms of building that sense of community and how we construct that, and the types of people we want around us, and empathy. So all too often, empathy is disposable. Believe it or not, when I go to bed, I don't sleep. So I'm in something I've never slept, to be honest with you. It's been like this for 20, maybe nearly 20 years. And a lot of it is worry. A lot of it's worry, and it's worry about how much people suffer. And it really, really kills me just how much suffering there is in the world. And probably worse than that, how much suffering we can inflict on one another in our own communities. So for me, it's kind of the one thing we kind of want to put in this cake is empathy. The thing that we have in the other cake of individualism is disposable empathy. So we can see somebody's going through something, and actually we're like, oh, next. I mean, it's bad, but it doesn't affect me. But I feel sorry for that person, but it doesn't affect me. And it's that whole idea of, can we hold someone else's discomfort? Can we hold someone else's pain? Because part of a community is that. Part of a community is holding someone else's pain, someone else's discomfort, and helping them through. And as a collective, we can do that. Now, in terms of kind of thinking about the last part of this cake, what would be the icing on the cake, metaphorically speaking? I guess the icing would be, in some respects, is thinking about how we center and create spaces for people. So how do we create spaces for the most minoritized? So if we think about higher education in particular, Black women, women of colour, but particularly Black women, face often very precarious situations within higher education, and they're left in very vulnerable situations. And we need to think as a collective what we can do to continue to mobilise Black women and give them the agencies in those spaces. I think that becomes hugely important. And I guess we've got to the icing and we have this cherry. And what might the cherry be? And I think the cherry is always faith. It's always faith. So there's always this idea of hope. And, you know, I always think, you know, there's an expression that they use where they say it's the hope that kills you. I disagree with that. I think it's the hope that gives you strength, and it's the hope that gives you belief that things are getting better. When I first went to this conference 6 or 7 years ago, and I first met Bernadine, I'm not a skeptical person, but I remember thinking, wow, there's a lot of work to do here. I mean, I was in awe of Bernadine in the first place. So that was the first thing. And her magnetism and her, you know, the way she's able to bring people together. You know, that's a really unique skill. Really unique skill, and she was able to do this in a space, really, you know, to try and explain to people how different things have changed, or how much things have mobilized in the last 6 or 7 years. It is quite incredible. I always think people might wake up and think, oh wow, you know, there's a generation of people thinking it's always been like this. And, you know, it's people, you know, people who've been at the vanguard of this revolution, people like Bernadine, who have created these spaces for people to be able to now, I suppose, be in a situation where you can almost take things a little bit for granted, which is a good thing, by the way. We, as people of colour, as Black people, we're allowed to take things for granted. I mean, God knows we never get to. But I always so think it's very important, as my dad always says, the pioneers never reap the benefits of their soil. And there are a lot of Black women that create a lot of agency for Black and ethnic minority people to thrive in the academy. And it's also important in terms of that cherry that we put on the cake, that we think about how we can create spaces for them to thrive, and not only thrive, but also have periods of rest, also find ways to kind of redistribute the labor and the responsibility of this work. And I think that becomes hugely important. And I guess, you know, when we make anything or bake anything of any note, what do they always say? The proof is in the pudding. So I guess the proof is in the eating, right? And one of the things that I kind of think about is, what would this cake taste like? Now, in my mind, in my idyllic mind, there's probably a romanticization and a melancholy about the fact that it would probably taste, well, I like sweet things. So it tastes really sweet, it'd be really nice. And being an African boy, I love tin milk, evaporated milk. So I would put evaporated milk on it as well. And in my mind, it tastes great. It tastes great. But, you know, cooking on a page and cooking in practice are always two completely different things. I've never tasted anything, I've never eaten anything with my eyes on paper that tasted bad, but I have eaten stuff in practice that tastes horrible. Now, I can theorize about what would make a good cake, but fundamentally, the proof is in the tasting, and the tasting comes in the practical sense. What are the practical things that we can do? In terms of building that community, it is so, so, so important that you think very carefully about the types of people you have around you. I was very fortunate to have met Bernadine. I was very fortunate to have met Professor Donald. I was very fortunate to learn from Bernadine, learn about the things that she did. And, you know, one of the things that was immensely inspiring about Bernadine is that she did it with this amazing grace. She does it with this amazing grace. And, you know, I think there's about 10 people, I would say, that are the jewel in the crown of higher education in the UK. And I would place Dr. Bernadine as one of them. And the reason being is because that cake that she looks at in theory on a page is something that actually she's able to do very, very well in practice. In other words, she can replicate this recipe at conference 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now I think we're at our 6th, I think. So she's been able to replicate that recipe over and over again. Now, that's not to take away from anyone who's able to replicate a recipe over, you know, once and be a one-trick pony, so to speak. I'm probably one. But to be able to do it so consistently over a period of time to be able to build this community. In some respects, you know, what Bernadine's done is build the 300. If you've ever seen the movie, The Spartans, she's built the 300. You know, you've got this huge empire that we're going up against in terms of, literally speaking, the empire, in terms of, you know, racism, intersectional inequality, discrimination, all of those things. And she's taken this small cabal of people to take on this establishment in some respects, and has done it in the most effective an inclusive way, bringing a lot of people along with her, white allies included. And really, I don't know if anything I've said has made sense, but it's important to kind of emphasize that this ode really to Bernadine is to emphasize that when the greatest thing that I think people are able to do is to take something that is very, very difficult and make it look very easy. What Bernadine's actually been able to do is build a sense of community and make it look very, very easy. But in reality, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes for her to motivate and to cultivate this kind of culture for us all to be privileged to be able to sit in. And I think the thing that's important is thinking about what can we do to support other women of colour doing this amazing work, like Paulette Williams, for example, Dr. Chantal Lewis, etc., who are these types of people doing this work? You know, Dr. Deborah Husbands. How can we support these people? Before I kind of point the proverbial finger at anyone, I think the first person I'd always look at is myself. And I'm by no means perfect, but I have tried my absolute best and will continue to do so. But I must say that I've always taken my lead from the most exceptional Black women that our sector has to offer in society more broadly. So I hope that makes some sort of sense. My whole thing is that I never want to bore people to tears, and I'm always more intrigued to learn from all of you and to have a sense of dialogue, because I don't like talking at people, I like talking with people. So it goes without saying, just thank you so much for the space. I'm so grateful. Bernadine, I really do think you're one of the very, very best. And it's not lost on me that I am very, very fortunate to be in the position I'm in, but I can say this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, with as much love and sincerity as I could muster. Thank you so much for everyone's support over all of the years. Without any of you, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And if I've achieved anything of any kind of note, it's really because of all the belief that you've all had in me and all the small prayers that everyone has said that's kind of created this mighty ocean. So I love you all dearly very much, and God bless, and thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. There's a round of applause for you in the room. We've got 15 minutes for questions. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you great.
Yeah, okay, all right. So questions, I think we have to use the mic so that Jason can hear. Any questions, comments?
Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen, and Jason, to be honest, you just inspired me. I find your presentation very beneficial, and I was just going to ask, you're a very young person and you've achieved really this much. What would you say are the strategies you had in place that led to your success, even as a Black young man in one of the top universities of the world? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I mean, to be honest, I had to write something about 2 or 3 years ago when I first became professor at Glasgow for the Times Higher Education, and they kind of said, like, you know, we really want to celebrate the fact that you're at that time the youngest professor in the UK. And I said to them, look, to be honest with you, there's not really anything to celebrate. I would say I'm a bit of a cautionary tale of what not to be. So I joke about this a lot, but it's the truth, right? So one of my favorite films is Karate Kid, and Mr. Miyagi kind of says, good balance makes good karate. And I've said this to a lot of people before, and metaphorically speaking, I don't have balance. So I've worked all the hours God sends, and I don't, it means that life passes you by. And so what I tell people all the time is that yeah, I couldn't have worked any harder. Like I couldn't have done any more than I did. And I pretty much sacrificed everything in trying to help as many people as possible, not just myself. But the thing I would say is that you need balance. And I think the most important thing is that I was working from a position where I knew that I wasn't the most gifted academic. I knew I didn't particularly have a lot of skill, but I've mentioned this before. I did have the will, and I was so determined, and I felt that I needed to dedicate every second of every single day to try and achieve something. And also, my mum had sacrificed so many years looking after me that I wanted to show her that, I can't give her those years back, but by trying my best, that's the only way I can show her that I'm so grateful for everything she did. So the advice I would give to people in the academy is that balance is really important. Self-care is really, really important. I'm terrible at that. And the thing that I would also mention is that most people I meet, in terms of Black people, their level of skill is so exceptional, I can't even comprehend it. And the one thing that they need to have to complement that, which most people also often have in terms of Black people, is the will. And if you're blessed enough to have those two things, which to be quite honest with you, most Black people I've met in the academy do have, then the sky should be the limit. My job in the position that I've been in and that I continue to be in is to make sure that that playing field is as level as possible, so that when Black people pay the freight on everything they need to do, when their opportunity comes, they're not denied it because of their race, they're not denied it because of their gender or any other intersectional variable that's levied at Black and ethnic minority people. They get it on merit. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And my job is to try and achieve that. I keep trying, but I think the most important thing is that Black people are so exceptional, and I guess I always knew that. The only person I probably never thought that about myself, ironically, was me. I didn't think I was particularly exceptional, and I still don't. But I think the most important thing is also hope and faith, and it's about, sometimes people say how badly they want something, but it always comes down to what would you be willing to sacrifice, and I think there's a balance in that. For me, I think maybe the cost was too much, but then the other side of it is that I also feel like I've been very, very privileged to have helped a lot of people. And if someone said to me, would I have done it differently? I wouldn't do it differently. But that doesn't mean I would advise someone to do what I've done, because this isn't everything. There are a lot more important things in life. And the easiest way to explain that is that my daughter is 17 and I really don't know where all the time went. And if she was sat here right now, she'd turn around. If you asked her, what do you think of my dad? What do you think of your dad? She'd say he was awesome. If you said, do you think dad's always present? He'd say he is present, but he's not present, if that makes sense. And it's things like that where you think, if I could do it all over again, like I just don't understand where the 17 years went, and my younger one, it's different. But that's what I mean. Balance is very important. And I mean this with all sincerity. This isn't everything, but what is everything is having that balance, but also managing that ambition alongside it. And if you put those two things together really well, not only will you get to the top, but you'll be really, really happy inside, if that makes sense. And sometimes I'm not always happy because I look at the inequality and it gets me down, because I feel there are a lot more exceptional people than me, and they should be in the position I'm in. And so that gets me down, but it makes me also realize I've got a lot more work to do to make sure that this doesn't become something that I don't want to be the only person. I never did. And that's the thing that's always driven me.
Thank you, Jason. We've got a question online.
Joanna, would you like to ask a question? Unmute yourself. Or you can just type it in the chat and we'll relay it for you.
Oh, that's great.
While we wait for Joanna, are there any more questions in the room? Yeah. Right. Like Kendi said, I'm getting my steps in.
Okay, thank you very much for
Oh, she's
thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the lecture, Jessin and Bernardine, for this platform. Yeah, I just looked you up online. I saw that you couldn't speak until you're 11 years old, and I mean, in a space of less than 25 years, you've done so much for yourself. What was that? And this is to some people, some teachers have probably told them, oh, you can't be this, you can't get to this because you have this. How are you able to surmount that challenge? How are you able to speak to yourself to get yourself out of that stereotype and to achieve great things?
Joanna, thank you so much. To be honest, like I was very fortunate to have the mother I did and the father I did, but particularly my mother. I was very, very fortunate to have one gifty Arday. I was very, very lucky that she chose me to be her son, or God chose her to be my mother, shall I say? And I had a teacher at college, Sandro, who massively, he changed my mentality when I was 18. But I think the biggest thing was that I genuinely don't believe there's nothing I can't not do, because I think I'm willing to suffer. A big part of it is how much you're willing to suffer, and I think I was always good at that because I'm so good at losing. I lost so much in my life that I was always able to lose with exceptional grace, which meant that when I won occasionally, I could be a good winner. And I knew what it felt like to lose. But I think the biggest thing was that I just wouldn't give in, and I always had this. I think, look, I could give you 101 answers, but if I'm just going to be absolutely honest with you, I don't know how useful this answer will be to you, but I think it's destiny. I really do. There is no explanation I can give. I've had so many people ask me this question, and the only thing I can really say it's destiny, and I'm just very fortunate that God decided that it'd smile down on me. I just think maybe I was destined to be in this situation, because, like I said, there are people far more capable, a lot more gifted than I'll ever be, and for some reason, I think there's some aspect of fate to it, and I also I worked really. I gave it everything I had, and probably the more important aspect of that is that everything I had, I gave away. I shared as much as I could with people. I helped as many people as I could, and maybe the good Lord saw it upon himself to bless me because of the things I'd been fortunate enough to maybe do for other people. I'd love to tell you there was some scientific or pragmatic or positivist answer, but there really isn't. I just think that it was fate, and I got very fortunate to have the mother that I did.
Okay, this is Tony. Thank you so much for sharing with us. You're truly an inspiration.
Oh, that's so
Back to
kind.
your cake metaphor. I love metaphors, by the way. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Your cake metaphor. What would be the oven in your cake metaphor?
What would be the oven? That is such a great question. What would be the oven? Well, it definitely isn't the academy. Funnily enough, I think the oven, and I'm saying this in front of friends, so I hope it's taken as such. I think the oven could be built, or the oven could be, metaphorically speaking, it could be more men of color. I think we can do more, in my opinion. That's, I think white allies can always do more. It goes without saying. But in terms of thinking about responsibility and accountability, I think men of color can do more. And I think that oven, because fundamentally it's always grandma's hands that is kind of doing the building and the lifting and the mobilizing, to kind of quote Bill Withers. But I think the oven could be men of color doing more. That's structurally, I think, what the oven could be. And I think that we're beginning to see that in kind of small tenets, but I think there needs to be a collective action amongst men of colour in the academy to really think about how they bake that cake. And, you know, if we're going to talk about it being metaphorical, that cake is the mobilization of Black women. In the same way, historically, Black women have always mobilized Black men and men of colour, and women of colour have also done the same. And I think that's hugely important.
Thank you. So I think you somehow answered my question in a different way. So, sorry. I think you somehow answered my question in a different way. I want to ask, like, it is easier to build or like influence once you come to a position of power, like position of influence. So do you like wait till you achieve that position, or like how do you navigate while also advancing in career and also while influencing and building communities? I know it's a very difficult question, and you also talked about sacrifice and also like how much do you sacrifice? So
yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I guess you're asking in relation to myself, so I can only speak for myself, but that there are a couple of people on this call maybe that might know me, and I've worked in higher education for just over 10 years, and I mean, if I can be candid, I never waited until now to do it. I did it when I first came in, and the reason I did is because actually they always say you should never meet your heroes, and I saw a lot of examples of what I didn't want to be, unfortunately. So again, those kind of horrible ingredients of individualism, you know, selfishness and all those kind of things, I didn't want to be that, but that was the only thing I observed when I came into higher education. So, you know, you'd ask people for help and no one would really help you. So it then made me think about what I don't want to be and what I'm going to try and do differently. And so I always help people from the very beginning, and anyone that knows me or has known me over the last 6 or 7 plus years, I think could say that. And I don't talk about everything I do for, you know, because that's not the point, that's not the purpose of helping people, but I've always done it. And I guess as the stakes have got higher and higher, you maybe have more resources, so you can do more and more and more. And this is probably the most resources I've maybe ever had to be able to do that. So it's really a continuation of my mission from when I first started 10 years ago. And that mission was born out of the fact that there wasn't actually anyone that I saw that was really engaging in that sense of collectivism and community that we also cherish now in terms of what Bernardine has done here today and has done for many years. So that was the big thing. And I guess you only really know how committed you are to these things when things start changing and the more opportunities you got. So one of the things that was said to me very often is that if I become more selfish, I could progress very, very quickly. And I rejected that. I never did it. And I honestly believe if I had been like that, I don't think I'd be in a position I'm in now. And I think the sense of kind of well-being and protecting oneself is always a difficult thing because there's a cost to everything. And I think the most important way you can kind of levy that cost is to try and distribute or have a collective, you know, that collective responsibility helps in ensuring that the burden doesn't fall on, you know, the few. And that's why I think it's important for all of us, you know, in this space, particularly as I've mentioned today, men of color and white people in particular, to lift as much of that burden as possible so that the burden is evenly distributed. And I think that's how one is able to sustain themselves. When that sense of collectivism isn't there, it falls on a couple of people and the weight of that burden is crushing. And I guess like that's the thing that can be difficult. And in my own context, you know, I do feel a huge sense of pressure because I think because of the way I've done it, there's been a huge weight of expectation for many, many years because people kind of see you as a nice person that helps everyone. And so you never say no. And I guess it has consequent and knock-on effects on other things, which is why I always say I'm a cautionary tale. And that's not to say not to help people. It's just to say that if we all chip in, it makes it easier that it doesn't fall on a few of us. It falls on all of us to do that, you know, and I hope that makes some sort of sense.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gogo Anyao Jr. I'm a PhD student in the University of Leeds. Thank you very much, Professor Jason. You're a very huge source of inspiration.
Thank you.
To
That's
me,
so kind of
yeah. But I've heard what you said about sacrifice, right? We've been told that people who have achieved great things, you know, actually sacrifice a lot. But in academia, what I want to ask you specifically is the fact that you did your master's, you did your PhD, and you're now a professor under a short period of time. How did you do that? Because, you know, for me, it's important to learn. I want to be an academic, but most times when I listen to stories, I become scared. Will I ever become an academic? Especially when one has, you know, been in the industry for a long time. So how were you able to do it? I know you need to publish a lot of articles. And what are those sacrifices specifically that you made to be able to get to where you are? Because I mean, it's different for everyone, but stories like yours can help someone like me to begin to pencil down how to program myself to be able to get to where you are. As a mentor, mentoring must not be when I engage you personally. Mentoring is in a space like this, like Bernardine has provided. So mentor me and probably some other people in a short period of time now. Thank you.
No, that's great. No, thank you so much. I mean, the first thing is that you're going to become an academic. You're a lot more exceptional than I'll ever be, Gogo. So that's just remember that. And how did I do it? I mean, look, what I'm going to tell you is not something I wouldn't recommend somebody to do this, but for like 15 years, maybe longer, I didn't sleep. So I was a PE teacher, so I didn't train I wasn't a trained sociologist, so I don't have a degree in sociology, none of them, believe it or not. So I taught myself at night, and I basically made a decision that I don't have the same academic gifts that most people have, but I do have this will to succeed. But I needed to take up every single inch possible to convert as many meters in my favor as possible. And so I read, I learned, I studied, I did it obsessively. And I think for 15 years, I wrote 500 words a day on anything, just so I could improve my writing. But the biggest thing was I was dedicated and obsessive. I was really, really obsessive, which is why when I say, like, you know, there are aspects of my behavior that I wouldn't, in all good faith and consciousness, advise someone to be, but I did really want to be an academic. And I knew that from the position I was starting from was going to be very difficult, but I set some really clear goals. And I think some people are goals focused and goals orientated. I am quite goals orientated. But my goals are selfless. They're not goals that are so much associated with myself. So it's always been about wanting to help people. And I knew that the harder I worked, the more I could do to help people. And so because my intrinsic motivation was always altruistic, I always wanted to help as many people as possible. And I just kind of surmised that if I worked as hard as I could, I would get into more elevated positions where I could do that. So it goes without saying, every person works hard. I mean, particularly if you're an ethnic minority in British academia. But the thing I would say is to have a clear set of goals and to manifest them. And, you know, it's been well documented now, but I said, you know, I was decorating my mum's bedroom wall, my younger brother, and I wrote 3 goals on this Post-it. And one of the, and the final goal on the post-it was that I wanted to one day work at Oxford or Cambridge. Now, to give you some context, when I wrote that in 2012, I was still teaching PE in school. So I was still a school teacher, teaching PE in school. So I think putting those goals up and having something to work towards is really important. And then it's kind of really about strategy and being really strategic. So how are you going to do that? And a lot of the things I learned off observing people, because in academia, if there's 5 directions to the station, people tend to give you 2. And then they say, when you get to the end of the road, ask somebody for directions to the station. The truth is, everybody knows what the secrets are. It's just that because it's so horribly individualistic, egotistic, selfish and competitive, no one ever gives you all of the details. They always miss a few out. And I guess the details that I would tell you is that you always need to think about, right, I need to be strategic in terms of where I publish. I need to think about the types of jobs that I go for. I need to think about what I'm doing that's slightly different. And I need to look at job specs and make sure that every aspect of my CV is tailored towards that. And I also need to be ambitious. And every Black person I've met in academia is ambitious, and every person of colour I've met in academia is ambitious. But there's a difference between ambition and then kind of unapologetically going for it. And the unapologetic part of it is the abandonment of imposter syndrome. So my belief is that I don't believe in imposter syndrome, because I believe that you are all where you're supposed to be. You are all great beyond measure, and you're all where you're supposed to be. That's not an accident. That didn't happen by accident. That happens because you're blessed and you're great. And you really have to walk into that and be unapologetic about what you want to do. So if you say right now, go that I want to be a professor 5 years from now, then you go for it. But you have these ingredients in place about how you're going to construct this wonderful cake, and be really, really focused around how you're going to do that, whilst engaging in self-care, because that's what I didn't do. It's also why I went grey really young, I think. But I strongly believe that. And if there's one thing that I say, that if you remember anything that I say, I really do believe in abandoning imposter syndrome is the greatest gift you can give to yourself. Wherever you are, so a PhD student at the moment at University of Leeds, one of the best universities in the world, you're there because you're the best. You're there because you're one of the best. So that's something you need to hold on to. You're not there by accident. You will know the cost of everything you've done to get to this point now. And I know this sounds crazy to say, but you're really not far off. You're really not far off. You just got to hang in there and be really unapologetic about what you're going to do from here on in, and say to yourself that this is where I'm supposed to be. None of this like, oh, sometimes I feel like I don't know. No, like, if there's one thing I do know, I don't know a lot, but if there's one thing I do know, is that Black people and people of colour more generally are truly exceptional, and there is no mountain they cannot overcome. And I'm telling you, in 3 or 4 years' time, maybe sooner than that, you'll be headlining this bill and you'll be giving the same advice to someone else. And I honestly believe that with all of my heart.
Thank you, Jason. There's one question online, and then there's another question down there, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
So this question is from Marlo Delara. You've touched a bit on this already, but it says, I find it difficult in academia when working with other people of the global majority, and they don't have the same attitude towards a collective mentality. In practice, it can reinforce oppression Olympics and centers harmful hierarchies. Do you sense a shift in academia of tending to one another as opposed to leaving others behind? And do you propose calling them in, or how do we acknowledge these harmful behaviours amongst Black and brown academics in the community? It's heartbreaking.
That's a great question. And I have to admit, that is the thing that kills me more than anything. And that's, unfortunately, that was my experience when I first came into academia. A lot of these people that I kind of looked up to, if I'm being honest, it was very disappointing when I met them and I saw that actually that there was a huge disconnect. The praxis element, there was a huge disconnect between their theories and what they said and what they actually did. And I always go back to this Maya Angelou quote. It's about how you made people feel. And, you know, I feel like none of these people, it was a sad realization to see that they were all in it for themselves, which, by the way, I don't begrudge them, and to each to their own. But I think if you say one thing and you do something completely different, I think it creates a juxtaposition and a hypocrisy that's quite hard to digest. And I found that difficult. As you get older, you learn more as to some of the reasons why people do that, and you probably become slightly less judgmental of that. But I still think that I think things have changed, if I'm being honest. Like I said, I've spoken about it many times today, but people like Bernadine, people like Paulette, you know, people like Chantal, you know, the amazing work Donald does across several kind of institutions in society and in the academy has been hugely integral to changing how people think about these things. And I do think things are changing. I think there is more of a collective fist now. You know, you've got more and more people thinking in ways to protect one another. And I think in such divisive and fractious times, never has it been more important for us to stay together. You know, drawing on Al Green, like, this is the most important time. Let's stay together. Like, we will win in the end, but the end, in terms of where the line is, can be determined by us. The better we stay together as a collective, the sooner the finishing line will come. But if it stays as sporadic as it is, it becomes more difficult, and that finish line just moves further and further away. Now, we will win, believe me, but we are the ones ultimately that will determine when we win. And I think the more we stay together, the sooner the finish line will come. And I think that's hugely important. And I think we have to protect that as much as possible. We really, really have to protect collectivism, love, faith, and looking out for one another. It's so important. And I think that you know, the compassion and love that we need to have for one another is the thing that's going to steer us through these really difficult times. And it's why I always try and talk about it any opportunity I get, because my faith in human beings, despite some of the horrible things that happen in this world, has never been unshaken. I think human beings are capable of great things, and I think that they're capable of amazing and beautiful things that can uplift people. And we just need to keep that at our core. If we can keep that at our core, we're going to win this thing. We're going to win this thing. I just know it.
Good afternoon, Prof. It's in trouble. I don't know if my question will make sense, but I'm looking at what you said about men of color being part of this, because I'm thinking that we are taking it many different levels, because it starts from even raising a child.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite hear that. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know which part you heard.
I heard raising a child.
Okay. 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 I think it's taking it a step back, because it's about even raising a child of color, what that means. So it feels like sometimes in these institutions, we are dealing with trying to raise some people's children because they are dealing with the baggage of growing up like that. So now we are trying to fight our own war as women and Black women and women of color. But part of that involves raising the kids that other parents couldn't raise. And then we have to deal with that in all our careers.
That's such a great point. Thank you so much. And I guess the pastoral element of that there's a tax on that. There is a tax on Black women in terms of their emotionality, their psychological state, their physical well-being, you know, and I think it is incumbent, you know, we all have a sense of agency. It's incumbent on people, men of color, white women, you know, white men, any of the above, to do that work on themselves, so that work isn't always left to Black women to do. I can't emphasize this enough. I was very, very fortunate to have the mother that I did. That taught me things that I probably didn't I appreciated it when I was younger, but it's something that's held me in very good stead. Now I'm an adult, because they're just things you learn. You know, you take it for granted being read, you know, Black feminist literature from a very young age. Even though I didn't have a clue what Mum was talking about, there were books all around the house. You know, we went to a lot of things, me and my brothers, around that really kind of placed an emphasis on what we need to do as men of colour to support Black women. And, you know, those lessons that I had 25 years ago, you know, I really kind of cradled a lot of my thinking to this point now. And I think the points you make are so true. And I can only speak for myself that I'll continue to do work on myself so that I can be of better service and support and uplift Black women and women of colour more generally.